Welcome to the Broken System Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Parmer. Together, we'll explore the complex problems people face in our flawed justice systems. Join me as I share the stories of those marginalized by circumstances beyond their control, often made worse by the political environment in their area. We'll discuss issues like drugs, prostitution, financial struggles, and socioeconomic issues while diving deep into the lives affected by these challenges. In each episode, I'll uncover the hidden stories, exploring the human experiences and emotions of those fighting against an unfair system. With empathy and insight, I'll discuss the systematic forces at play, personal battles, and the resilience that emerges. Through interviews, research, and storytelling, the Broken System Podcast aims to help you understand these issues better. By giving a voice to those often unheard, I hope to start the conversations that lead to a positive change and a collective effort to fix the system that has left many behind. Join me on a journey of discovery, empathy, and empowerment as we explore those stories that challenge our views and inspire us to work towards a fairer society. Welcome to the Broken System Podcast. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Broken System Podcast or its host. We encourage listeners to form their own opinion and conduct their own research. Additionally, this podcast may contain content and language that is not suitable for children. Listener discretion is advised.
It's been 3 days since Amber Spradlin's body was found in a home in Martin, Kentucky, and it's still unclear what led to her death. But what we do know is this community is standing right beside the family, seeking justice for their loved one and offering their support.
Amber Spradlin's family wants answers. Kentucky State Police are investigating, and at this point, no one has been charged with anything related to Spradlin's death.
Spradlin, who was 39 years old, was found dead in a home off of Arkansas Creek Road in Martin on Sunday. Kentucky State Police have said they believe this was no accident, but that's all that's been released so far.
The cause of death for 38-year-old Amber Spradlin was released Thursday, June 29th at a press conference held by her family. Spradlin was stabbed in the head, neck, and face at least 11 times, leading to her death on June.
Has a new chapter as 3 men are behind bars. One accused of Amber Spradlin's murder. 2 others accused of helping him clean up the crime scene and get rid of the evidence.
3 people have been arrested in connection to a case where a Prestonsburg woman was killed in June of last year. 56-year-old Dr. Michael McKinney, a well-known dentist, as well as his son, 24-year-old Michael McKinney, and 23-year-old Josh Mullins.
3 men have been indicted in the stabbing death of a woman from Floyd County, Kentucky,
when police arrested suspects in the Amber Spradlin murder case.
A grand jury indicted 3 men, including a prominent Floyd County dentist and his son.
More than a year after a woman was found dead in a Floyd County home, state police have arrested 3 men in connection to her murder.
Welcome to the Broken System Podcast. I'm your host, Robert. Thank you for joining us this week as we continue to tell you about Amber's story. Big news, 3 people were arrested. That's a very, very, very good thing. 408 days after Amber's murder, Michael McKinney III, or MK, Dr. Michael McKinney II, and Josh Mullins were arrested. Michael McKinney III, or MK, was charged with murder and 7 counts of a Class D felony of tampering with physical evidence. Dr. Michael McKinney and Josh Mullins were both charged with 7 counts of tampering with evidence. MK's bond was set at $5 million, cash only. Dr. Michael McKinney's bond was set at $250,000, cash only. And Josh Mullins' bond was set at $100,000 cash only. What an all-cash bond means is that you cannot use a bail bondsman, that it must be the full amount, cash only, put up for the bond. As of the time of this recording, only Dr. Michael McKinney has made the $250,000 bond. Josh Mullins and MK both have neither made bond. Dr. Michael McKinney, he is on house arrest as a condition of his bond, and his dentist license has been suspended by the state, so he can no longer practice until this matter is taken care of. So this week, I appreciate you guys waiting for this episode. I wanted to make sure that we got everything out as best as possible, let everything go through the system and figure out what filings and see all of the paperwork. And I wanted to be able to hopefully answer some questions that I've seen come up on the Facebook groups, and I know some other people have asked about things. So what I've done is I've asked Brett Talley of the prosecutors to join me this week to go over the filings, to go through these things and kind of go through this stuff. To those that don't know Brett is a federal prosecutor in the Southeast, and he's also the co-host of the Prosecutors Podcast and Legal Briefs podcast with his co-host Alice. So we're just going to jump straight in with Brett. Brett, 2 weeks ago, grand jury met and they issued indictments for MK for murder and 7 counts of tampering with evidence. Then for the father, Dr. McKinney, and his best friend, Josh, they were issued indictments on 7 counts of tampering with evidence. So what I want to start off with is a lot of questions have came up about why they were charged that way. I know that this is Kentucky and you're in a different state, but I think you can get a good grasp on why. And I have my thoughts on it, and I'll tell you those a little later on if they don't line up why I thought that way. But this way you can, I'd like you to tell me what you think of the reasoning why they were charged this way.
Yeah, typically these kind of things, it's either going to be, not to state the obvious, but it's either going to be a legal issue or a factual issue. It's either going to be the way the law is set up in Kentucky, or there's some factual thing they're missing. So, for instance, a lot of crimes require some sort of knowledge and specific intent. So, for instance, it's possible that your kid calls you and says, hey, this girl just died at my apartment. I'm afraid somebody's going to think I did something. I didn't do anything, but I'm afraid somebody's going to think I did something. Can you help me out? And you show up and you help dispose of any evidence that would make someone think wrongly that your beloved innocent child was somehow involved in their death. Something like that would be, in a lot of states, would be something like tampering with evidence, because you're tampering with evidence whether or not you know exactly what happened, whether or not you intend to cover up a murder or not. On the other hand, if you find out, if your kid calls you and says, hey, I just killed this person, I need you to help me cover it up, that's much more like a accessory after the fact. So that might be a fact-based reason. It may be that at this point, the Commonwealth of Kentucky doesn't feel like they have enough information to say specifically this was covering up a murder. They knew it was a murder and they were trying to cover up a murder, and that's what they were doing. But we do know they were absolutely destroying evidence. And because they were absolutely destroying evidence, we're going to charge them with that. And that way it'll be much easier for us to prove the case. And this is particularly true when you think someone might flip. When you're thinking, we're going to charge you with this, and then we're going to work it out, basically. And you're going to plead guilty to something, but you're going to give us a bunch of information. If you're doing that, less reason to shoot for the stars, maybe. You're already anticipating how this is going to go. And you can always supersede an indictment later. So if you get more information, the case develops more, you can go ahead and supersede and add those more serious charges. Now, it's also possible, like you said, I'm not from Kentucky. I don't practice in Kentucky. I don't know exactly how their statutes are set up. I don't know exactly how their sort of accessory to murder is set up. So it may also just be a legal thing that in Kentucky, this is the way you would typically deal with these kind of activities if your primary involvement in the crime was destroying or hiding evidence. This is the charge we're going to have. So I'm not sure exactly what it is. It may actually be some combination of all of those things, but it's not that surprising to me to see them go with these charges, no matter what the reasoning is behind it. I don't think it's surprising. I don't think people should be surprised. I don't think this is some sort of cover up to help out the dad, for instance. I don't think that's what's happening. I think this is probably calculated either based on the facts of the case, an anticipated cooperation, or just some narrow legal questions that maybe we don't have the answers to.
And that was my thoughts as well. I thought that they charged it this way with the thought process of, hey, once we charge this, one of these people may say, here, let me tell you exactly what happened. And then once that happens, they can always go back and add whatever they need to for that fact.
Exactly. And you have two people who are essentially being charged as accomplices here. And it's almost, it's a race to the courthouse in some ways. Right. Now, obviously, you have these close personal relationships that makes that a little harder. I just tell you, if these were just two random people, their lawyers would be fighting to be the first person to flip. Right. And that first person's going to get the best deal. And like you said, if they say, yeah, defendant number 2, dad called me and said, my kid just killed somebody. I need your help. Then you can go back and maybe make this a more serious crime than just tampering with evidence.
And I think that's how they feel with the third person. He's the odd man out because he's not family. He has he's indigent in all sense of the matter. He's not going to make bond because of those things. And he has a court-appointed attorney. The dad's taking care of himself and the son. So I think maybe they're looking at it as, well, maybe he's going to, at some point in time, want to get out of jail, and he will end up turning on them, I think.
Yeah, that would not surprise me at all. And that's always the weak link you're looking for in a case like this, where there's a mystery to exactly what happened. You've got some good evidence. You have a pretty good idea, but it's always good to have that person who can lay it out for you.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much on that. And then as we talk about that, one thing that's came out is the motion to dismiss by MK's attorney. MK's the son, and his attorney filed a motion to dismiss. And I think it's based on that the grand jury is supposed to be secret, but the family knew about the grand jury. They didn't say anything about it until after everybody was arrested. And the cousin, Debbie, who's been a very big advocate for Amber, she posted on her social media, hey, that the KSP did a great job, that they knew the grand jury was out, that was going to be happening, but this was all after the fact, after everybody was arrested. So nothing was like, to me, it wasn't any way, shape, or form hurting the grand jury in her statements. It was after the fact.
And I'll say a couple things on that. Reading this motion to dismiss, you've got basically two reasons to dismiss. The first is, like you said, the secrecy aspect. And then the second is they claim that it was never publicly returned in open court. And on the publicity thing, number one, that's not a reason to dismiss an indictment. If there's a violation of grand jury secrecy, there are remedies for that and punishments for that if someone actually does that. But grand jury secrecy doesn't mean the existence of the grand jury is a secret, such that even after an indictment is returned, you can't talk about it. Generally speaking, grand jury secrecy covers the evidence presented, and grand jury secrecy exists to protect the existence of the investigation before the indictment is returned, to prevent sort of aspersions being cast on people because a grand jury is looking into them. We don't, if the grand jury looks into them and determines, oh, nothing happened, they didn't do anything, they're perfectly innocent, you hate to have the fact that they're investigated out there because they look bad even though they didn't do anything. The third reason, the evidence that is presented, you want people to be candid, you want people to be open. We don't want people to know what is presented in grand jury and what is testified to. But that's really the limits to grand jury secrecy. So, for instance, if the police say an arrest is coming in this case, but they don't tell you who it is or anything like that, that's not a violation of grand jury secrecy. And talking about sort of the existence of the grand jury and general things about the grand jury after an indictment is returned is also not a violation of grand jury secrecy. In fact, the grand jury transcripts and everything else will be turned over to the defense. They're going to have it. So the secrecy of the grand jury, once an indictment is returned, starts to fade away. That's the first thing. The second thing about this motion to dismiss is it's based on what it claims is a technical error that this wasn't returned in open court. And I assume, looking at the indictment, the reason they say that is because there's no date on it. So it says it's signed by the foreperson, and then it says presented by the foreman of the grand jury to the court in the presence of the grand jury and received from the court by me and filed in open court this day of blank 2024 by Douglas Ray Hall, clerk. I assume that is the basis because it doesn't have a date in there. I'm not certain of is whether it was actually returned, like whether what the fact of the matter is. So that's going to be important, because if it in fact was returned in open court or was returned in sealed filing, then this is irrelevant. You're not going to dismiss an indictment over some sort of technicality like that. And just one other thing, the remedy here, if there's some sort of flaw in the indictment, is just to dismiss and re-indict and correct that error. This is not the kind of error that would result in this indictment being dismissed and it could never be filed again. For instance, that's not going to be a problem.
It's not an egregious error.
It's not egregious. It's not intentional. It doesn't prejudice the defendant. There's actually a pretty high standard for when you can dismiss an indictment that has like a real effect. It's very high. Basically, you have to show that the prosecution was maliciously and intentionally lying and misleading the jury and creating all sorts of misconduct. And it's got to be misconduct that's so bad that it overwhelms the evidence. So if the evidence is there for the grand jury to return, then even that's not enough, right? So it's a really high level. So this would be just a nuisance, if nothing else. In fact, it's the kind of nuisance that typically you wouldn't even file this, because what's the point? You don't actually get anything out of it. But the weirdest thing about it, and I got to highlight this because I just thought this was so strange. When you sent this to me, the first thing I always look for is the law, because I want to know what happens if you don't have a date on an indictment. Is there some weird law in Kentucky that says whether, even if it was returned, if they forgot to write down the date, then it's dismissed for all time? And in the motion to dismiss, there's a footnote that includes 3 cases. And typically, I'm pretty good at finding cases. I know this is a Kentucky case, and so maybe these are obscure. But one of them's from 2008. A couple of them are older. I am not sure that these cases exist. I'm not exactly sure where they came from. I couldn't find any of them. None of the 3 cases that are referenced, if you enter the citation, they're not there. I tried to find them based on case name. They're not there. I tried to find them based on year. It was like scrolling through criminal cases from 1955. They don't seem to be there. I'm not sure where they come from. When I did find cases on this that sort of mirrored what I just said about how technical defects are not something we're going to dismiss an indictment over, none of these cases came up. So I'm not sure if they're just really horribly miscited, or if somebody used like AI to look up cases and the AI just made the cases up. I don't know, because one of them has a pretty uncommon name, Good Pastor. I was like, well, I looked for Morris and Hill, and I thought, well, maybe it's just those are so common.
Just
when
so
I saw
many,
Good
right?
Pastor, I thought, man, Good Pastor, I'm going to find Good Pastor. Nope. There are some Good Pastor cases, but they're not this case, and they're not about grand juries or indictments. So I'm not sure how that happened, but that was a little weird, and I'll be interested to see what.
I had the same issue. I looked and searched trying to find case law on it, and I couldn't find any of those cases anywhere in any of the Kentucky stuff, no matter what I searched.
And they're supposed to be published cases too. Little esoteria about the law. Courts can have what they call published cases and unpublished cases. They're all published for you to read, so it's a misnomer, but really published cases are the important ones. They're the ones that create precedent, the ones you should really cite to, the ones that are binding. And then if you have a binding case that says when X do Y, then there'll be like 100 cases that just apply that case. And they don't, quote unquote, publish those cases. They just file them, and they're called unpublished cases because they're just applying the law. They're not making new law. These 3 cases are all published, according to the citations at least. So these should be important cases from the Kentucky Supreme Court, and yet they don't show up.
Yep, and that's part of the problem. So when that happens, if this goes in front of the judge on the 19th, just looking at the references to the case law, will the judge be like, what did you do, and throw it out? Or is he going to actually talk to them about it? What kind of situation is it going to be when it gets in front of the judge? Because I'm sure the judge is doing the same thing, going, let me look at this case law before we have this hearing to see.
I'm sure the Commonwealth will file a response at some point. And that response is probably going to focus on some of the cases that I was looking at that seem to say very different things than what's in this. It's funny because whenever you see like the AI generated cases, they always say exactly what you want it to say. Because they just make it up to say
because it's writing exactly what you've searched.
exactly. And these cases, at least the way they're described, because he doesn't quote from them, he didn't give us any language from them. Just they seem to like one of them is right on point that this is a mandatory procedural step and that it invalidates the indictment, and yet can't find it. So if the Commonwealth responds, I assume they're going to say, look, these cases, we don't know where he got these, but they don't exist. What I would imagine the judge would do is very briefly address the substance of the claim and just whether or not it's true. I find it hard to believe that they just forgot to return an indictment. That's what you do. It's just standard practice. Maybe they did. And if they did, then the judge will probably want the Commonwealth to tell him or her, what does the law actually say on that? Is this like a big deal? Can we fix this or not? And then I would turn to the defense counsel and be like, okay, you're in contempt because you're citing cases that don't exist to me. This is look, I hate to be too concrete on this because, like I said, maybe it's Kentucky and it's just hard to find these cases, and they're there. They're just not in the databases that you typically look in. But it seems like they don't exist, and that is a problem for the lawyer who included them in a filing. And when you do that, you're making a statement to the court. These are real. They say what I say they say, and you should take them seriously. We all, lawyers, try and argue that the cases say what we think they say. That's different from it's certainly different from just making up cases. So it's a very strange thing. I haven't seen that before, and I'll be interested to see what the outcome is.
I'm same for me. I want to see how the judge rules on that. And as soon as I have the states, I'll make sure to send that over to you so you can, because I have a feeling, because it is the state's attorney that is prosecuting the case. It's not the local attorney. So it's the state's attorney that's prosecuting it. So I'm sure he's crossed his T's and dotted his I's. He had 408 days to do that stuff and never indicted too soon because of those things, because he was waiting on the evidence to be there. I'm sure that something silly like that isn't going to be something that he would ignore.
No, absolutely. I would be very surprised.
Me too. So then the other questions that we've had, the other part that's going to go into this hearing on the 19th is the reduction of the bond hearing. So the bonds that were set for these guys, for MK, who is McKinney III, his was set at a $5 million cash only bond. The father, McKinney Sr., was set, McKinney Jr., sorry, was set at $250,000 cash only, and tons of restrictions of ankle monitor, in-house arrest, things like that. And then for Josh Mullins, his was set at $100,000 cash only, and same thing, same stipulations of ankle monitors and all of that kind of stuff. They're saying that the attorneys for each of these guys are saying that they are way out of proportion of what it should be, that they're not set at standardized rates throughout the state. So how does that go into it when the judge is looking at this? Is a judge's discretion. Obviously, he's the one setting the bond when he's standing there and when they're standing in front of him in court. So when they come back to him and tell him that he's wrong for the way that he did it, obviously there's case law or things like that they could bring up. How does that go in? How does that play when they come back into it?
Like you said, it is discretionary. It's not uncommon to have these kind of requests to reconsider and really to bring forth additional information on why you should do that. And you got to remember, bond, it's not punitive. It's not meant to be punitive. All of these people are still innocent until proven guilty, but we have to balance that fact with protecting the community and protecting the case. What's interesting about this one is You had a cover up. You had an attempted cover up. And to me, that argues for a higher bond because the fear would be, I would think, number one, obviously the person who's accused of murder bonds are going to be much higher because number one, you want the person, honestly, in a lot of cases, you don't want the person to get out at all because you're concerned about the danger they present. But if they do get out, you want there to be this sort of massive hammer hanging over their head. If they do anything wrong, not only are they going back to jail, but they're going to lose this big chunk of change, right? That's what you're trying to do. But you think about the fact that there's this accusation that evidence was tampered with and destroyed. I would be concerned if I was the judge that even the two individuals who were not accused of murder, that if they're out in the community, they could be doing damage to the case. And I think that's why you see on the lower bond levels, even if you can pay it, we want all these additional things on this person because even though they're not accused of killing anyone, we're concerned about them intimidating witnesses. We're concerned about them trying to destroy any remaining evidence. We're concerned about them maybe fleeing. That's the other thing. One reason you want a high bond is you want the person's, what's the word I'm looking for?
Livelihood or their financial well-being to be tied to it.
Exactly. Their livelihood, their financial well-being is tied to it. Their resources are tied up in it. So they can't just run off and leave, right? If most of their money is tied up in the bond, it's harder to leave, it's harder to flee, and you have less reason to, and the pain is higher if you do. Personally, I think this is one where the judge can very easily justify what they do. And with, like you said, this is a discretionary matter. We leave this to the judges, and we understand there's a reason it's not standardized. There are often standard sort of charts of the way you should do it. This is about how much it should be for this kind of crime. But the unique factors of each case are going to affect that. And it's going to lead to, there may be cases where it's a murder case, but you're actually going to have a little bit lower bond because of the circumstances. Imagine a case where you have a abused woman kills her husband, and there's some question about whether or not she did it. It was self-defense or premeditated or manslaughter in anger or something like that. You don't really think she's that much of a danger to the community because this is a very personal, very specific act. So that actually you might have a lower bond than you would typically have in a murder case. Here, given all the factors and the facts we know about, I think this is an appropriate bond, and it's one the judge would be well within his or her discretion keeping exactly where it is.
And I think he will too. I believe that what'll go into it is the one, if the family was willing to cover up for the kid, what would they do to get him out of this completely? Are they going to move him? Are they going to take him out of the country? Or are they going to do whatever they need to do? So I could see that being a reason behind it. And then I think once you pay the bond, they're not going to reduce it, correct? So the dad, he's out on bond right now. So that's not even a matter of anything. It'll only be the two, right? Or
that definitely weakens the argument for lowering the bond, unless an argument you could make, just imagining arguments. I need those resources for my defense. So I need some money for experts. I need some money for lawyers, whatever. Like you can make that kind of argument. Maybe that gets you somewhere, but I don't think so here. And honestly, I think because of what you said, this is a case where I could imagine no bond. Now, I don't know if Kentucky has no bond. Kentucky may have a rule that there has to be bond. There has to be a bond. So that's probably why it's so high, because really, this is a no bond case, but you just can't do that in Kentucky.
And then, so for the one for Josh Mullins, his was $100,000. It gets to a weird position for someone that has a public defender and has a bond, correct? So if they're able to pay the bond, does that affect their ability to have a public defender? How does that work?
So probably not. It would depend. So what's supposed to happen and what doesn't always happen, what is supposed to happen before you're assigned a public defender is there's supposed to be an investigation into your resources and finances to determine that you don't have enough money to have a lawyer. So that determination has been made. So if he pays the bond, if it comes from somewhere he didn't disclose previously, that could be a problem for him. But say it's like his mother decides to pay the bond or something like that. There are ways you could imagine the bond could be paid, but he is still eligible for a public defender.
Okay, so if it came from family or something like that as a gift, if it was gifted to him in some way, shape, or form, or
Right.
I guess with cash on a cash bond, I know that obviously when you use a bail bondsman, it's 10% or whatever the difference is. You never get that money back. On a cash bond, once you go to trial and everything's done, does that money come back to you once you show up, or how does that work?
That's all very jurisdictional. A lot of places don't even use cash bonds anymore. But yes, typically, if you there are fees and percentages, like you were saying. If you use a bail bondsman, there's a certain percentage that you're not going to get back because that's their fee for providing the money. But yes, if you pay a bond, you show up, you do what you're supposed to do, then you're going to get that money back. Like I said, it's not supposed to be punitive. It's not punishment. It's supposed to be to ensure your appearance in court, to ensure that you comply with whatever the conditions of release are, that sort of thing.
Perfect. Okay, that makes sense. And I know those were some questions. I'm trying to look right here, bail and conditions. So I don't think the conditions of their bail is it's out of the normal, just being with ankle monitors and house arrest, that type of situation. I think there is something that can go to work, but obviously the dentist, his license have been suspended. So I'm not sure how much work he can do anyway with that. So hopefully that'll stay that way for him.
Yeah, those kind of conditions of release are pretty typical. In fact, a lot of jurisdictions are going, as I said, are going away from bond altogether and doing it on a basis of danger to the community and risk of flight. And if you're a danger to the community, if you're too much of a danger, you're too much of a risk, you just are not released. If you are not a danger and not a risk of flight, you can be released on conditions much like these. And they've moved away from the bond thing because of concerns about, obviously, if you have more money, the bond isn't a big a deal. Whereas
Right.
if you don't have any money, $1,000 bond is a big deal, right? So you're seeing a little bit more of that, but the conditions are very common because if you let the father out, there's a real concern. And the reason I would not, I would have made it high enough, I think, that he couldn't get out. But there's a real concern that he's going to do something to endanger this prosecution. If if he has to give up $500,000, but it gets his kid out of prison and ensures he's never convicted, he's probably going to do that. So it's nice to also be able to monitor him at all times and see what he's doing and see where he's going and ensure that he's essentially staying where he's supposed to be. That's not uncommon at all.
Okay, perfect. I'm trying to think. Anything else that you want to know about this case or anything like that that you can think of?
Just interested to see where it goes. I think this is a case where it is highly likely the third person is going to become a witness for the Commonwealth. I think that's likely, and we'll see where this one goes. Seems like this one, once that happens, a good lawyer, a smart lawyer is going to start talking about a plea agreement.
That's what I think so too. And to be honest, I wouldn't put it past the dad being the one that ends up being the person to facilitate that, because he's going to try to protect his dentist license and his ability to practice in the States. I'm pretty sure that with a felony, that's going to get removed completely. So he's going to do whatever he can, especially if he's looking down the pipe of 7 felonies. Obviously, they'll probably end up combining a lot of these in the end if there is a plea deal. Because if not, I would assume that everything that they've been charged with, if it goes in front of a jury, that they will be convicted of that.
Yeah, I think loyalty changes quickly when you're looking at either going to prison for a long period of time or having the rest of your life destroyed. And you would be surprised how often family members will end up testifying against other family members to try and save themselves or save themselves from having to go to prison.
Brett, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it very much. Hopefully we were able to answer a good bit of the questions that have came about. I'll continue with Amber's case in 2 weeks. When we come back, I'm going to continue to go through the issues with the 911 system. I'm going to go through, we'll probably read through the indictments. We'll go through the anything that comes up in the next couple hearings, especially on the 19th. I'm hoping to maybe able to get a live out there to go on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube to answer questions live that way. And hopefully maybe Debbie can join us. If not just Debbie, maybe some other people as well. That will be the goal. I appreciate everybody, and we will continue to fight for Amber and fight for justice, and we'll make sure that you guys are up to date and know what's going on. Thank you. Thank you all so very much for listening. I appreciate you more than you know. I appreciate the time that you take to listen to my voice and to listen to my podcast, and it's very much appreciated. I don't know how to tell you how much I appreciate you guys listening and helping me get Amber's story out there. Thank you. This podcast episode was researched, written, and edited by me, Robert Parmer. Additional research done by Bree Grubbs. A shout out to Jessica with Just the Facts True Crime Research for helping and assisting with the FOIA request. Music and sound effects from Epidemic Sound. This week's outro song is It's Not Easy to Start Over by Walking Hearts featuring Christine Smith. And clips and research from Mountain News WYMT. Thank you for tuning in to the Broken System Podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you like what we're doing and want to support the show, consider joining our Patreon community. It's located at www.patreon.com/The Broken System Podcast. Your support helps us keep the podcast going and brings you exclusive content and perks. Don't forget to follow us on social media to stay updated with the latest news, episodes, and behind-the-scenes content. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or if you're calling it X, and Instagram at The Broken System Podcast. Remember, at The Broken System Podcast, we're fixing the world one conversation at a time. We appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more insightful discussions in the next episode. Until then, stay curious and keep questioning.
Oh, you don't need to let your body go. Hungry heart, it's not easy to start over. I've been there a couple of times, starting over. Know that when the night comes over you, rushes into you will shed that skin. Oh, it feels like a long run uphill. Steps, it's enough. Take it easy and let your feelings out. Don't push them aside. Don't hide. Know that when the night comes over you, rushes into you will shed that skin. Oh, it feels like a long run. Rushes into you will shed that skin.